The last few glands that I want to walk you through that are part of the endocrine system are the ovaries and the placenta. So, we're going to talk just a little bit about the gonads. We'll spend way more time talking about the gonads along with those hormones in Anatomy 2 when we cover the reproductive system. But the gonads produce steroid sex hormones. The ovaries, in particular, they're producing female hormones like estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen is incredibly important in helping the reproductive organs mature. So it's important in helping the labia get larger, the clitoris enlarges. Also, it helps with secondary sex characteristics, so the formation of breast tissue, as well as widening of the hips. With progesterone, there'll be some cyclical changes in the uterine mucosa, and this is what is going to trigger those monthly cycles, the monthly period. The placenta also secretes estrogens, progesterone, and another hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin. Now, obviously, unless you're pregnant, there is no placenta. So this is an organ that will take over and release a lot of these hormones throughout pregnancy. If you're not pregnant, then it's your ovaries that are releasing those hormones. And we can't talk about sex hormones and only focus on the female sex hormones. So let's also talk a little bit about the male sex hormone, testosterone. Testosterone is produced in the testes. Just like estrogen and progesterone, this male sex hormone helps the maturation of the male reproductive organs. So it helps those external genitalia become larger. It also helps with those secondary sex characteristics. So facial hair, hair on the chest, pubic hair. It also helps to increase muscle mass in a man, and it increases sex drive. Testosterone is essential for sperm production as well. Without testosterone or with low levels of testosterone, sperm production will be affected. Now, like I mentioned, we're going to talk so much more about these sex hormones when we get into Anatomy 2. At the very end of the semester, we'll talk about the ovaries and the testes and all the hormones that are being produced. Now, the last thing I'm going to walk you through in this chapter is just a couple of other hormone producing structures. So one of them is actually adipose tissue, your fat tissue, releases a hormone called leptin. Leptin actually helps to control your appetite. It tells your body how much stored fat you have. So the more fat you have, the more leptin you're releasing. Leptin tells your body, it helps to tell your body when you're full. It tells your body, we have enough fat. You don't need to eat anymore. You're good. You're full. However, some people are actually insensitive to the hormone leptin, and so they never really feel full and they'll continue to eat, even though leptin's being produced at very high levels. And so this is something that we think can trigger obesity, is an insensitivity to leptin. A few other hormone producing cells, there are some cells that we find in the GI tract that release some hormones. These are called enteroendocrine cells. So notice that it ends with endocrine, so you know that they are releasing hormones, endocrine hormones. Again, we find these in the GI tract, so anywhere from the stomach to the lining of the small intestine. And the hormones that get released are hormones like gastrin. This is a hormone that is being released by cells that line the stomach, and it actually stimulates the release of hydrochloric acid. This is what we find in our stomach. This produces gastric juice. This helps us break our food down a little bit more, liquefies our food. The other two hormones are called secretin and cholecystokinin, which is kind of a mouthful. Sometimes we call it CCK for short. Both of these hormones are released by the small intestine, and they stimulate the liver and the pancreas. And what they're doing is they're actually telling the pancreas to release enzymes to finish the digestion process, or they're going to the liver and the gallbladder, telling the liver to make more bile, or telling the gallbladder to release the bile. A few other structures include the heart. The heart releases a hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP for short. This actually helps to decrease sodium concentration in the blood. And remember, water follows solute. So if you drop the sodium concentration in the blood, you will also drop the water content of the blood, and that's going to drop your blood pressure. Okay, so anything that causes your blood volume to go down is also going to cause blood pressure to go down. I always think of blood pressure, when I think about blood volume and blood pressure, I think of a water balloon. And if you fill up a water balloon with a whole lot of water, that would be the equivalent of blood volume. So the more water you put in that water balloon, the more pressure there is in that balloon. The less water in that balloon, the less pressure. Okay, so if you decrease blood volume, you decrease blood pressure. And then we also have the kidneys. The kidneys release hormones as well. Hormones like erythropoietin, which we call EPO for short. This is a hormone that is essential for the production of red blood cells. So early on in Anatomy 2, the very first chapter we cover, which is on blood, we'll talk about erythropoietin. And another hormone that comes from the kidneys is called renin. And renin initiates something called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism, which also plays a huge role on water balance and blood pressure. Now, in terms of the development of your endocrine system, remember your endocrine glands are found pretty much all over the body. So all of these hormones that we're talking about in this chapter, some of them we've talked about already. For example, parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. We talked about those when we talked about bone. And a lot of these other hormones we'll actually talk about in Anatomy 2 as we cover those particular organ systems. All of these hormone-producing glands, because they're found all over the body, they arise from all three of your embryonic germ layers, the endoderm, the ectoderm, and the mesoderm. Most of your endocrine organs will operate just fine until you get a little bit older. However, any exposure to pesticides or chemicals or pollutants can actually disrupt hormone function. So here are some examples of that. Herbicides and paper products that release things like dioxins. These can bind to hormone receptors and disrupt hormone function. Plastic chemicals can act like environmental hormones. So chemicals that are found in plastics actually mimic hormones, and they can actually cause fish in waterways to become more masculinized due to their exposure to these chemicals. So I'll show you a picture of this. This is the eastern mosquito fish. You can see on the left is a normal female. So here's a normal female. And you can see the anal fin of a normal female. This is just looking at this anal fin up close down here. And then you can see over here a normal male mosquito fish, and you can see what that anal fin looks like on a male mosquito fish. And the difference is that a male mosquito fish contains or has something called a gonadopodium. Now I want you to look at the one in the middle. This is a female mosquito fish that has been exposed to environmental chemicals that act like hormones in the environment. They're dumped into the waterways. And so what you'll notice is that her anal fin looks very different. It's elongating here, and it's becoming much more like a gonadopodium that we would find in a male mosquito fish. And so again, a lot of these chemicals can look like or mimic hormones. And so in the environment, this can do a lot of damage to wildlife. Now, in terms of the development of our gonads, ovaries undergo significant changes with age. Obviously, when a woman goes through puberty, there's a lot of changes that begin happening, including things like menses, where women will have a period. There's cyclical monthly changes that happen with hormones. However, at some point, usually within 40s to 50s age range, a woman will go through menopause. menopause, where the ovaries will stop producing those hormones. Um, and And what we'll see without those hormones, with an estrogen deficiency, is that there can be some problems that come along with that. So, after a woman has gone through menopause, problems that she might encounter because she has a lack of estrogen might be low sex drive. Sometimes the vagina will become very dry in women. The breasts will shrink. So, a lot of those secondary sex characteristics that developed because of estrogen, they'll actually start to shrink and get smaller again. Now, testosterone will also diminish with age, but usually we don't see a huge effect until a man gets much older. Men can continue to have babies well into their old age. Now, as you get older, growth hormone levels will start to decline and your muscles will begin to atrophy. Your thyroid hormone will also start to decline as you get older, which is why a lot of times your basal metabolic rate will drop. You may gain a little bit of weight. You might feel cold all of the time because your thyroid hormones are a little low. Parathyroid hormone levels will stay pretty constant with age, but again, because women, their ovaries stop producing estrogen, it makes them a little more vulnerable to the bone demineralizing effects of parathyroid hormone. Remember, this is a hormone that's released when calcium levels are low, and it causes you to break your bone down and leach calcium from your bone. Estrogen actually protects our bones from that process. And so when a woman goes through menopause and no longer produces estrogen, this is why she's a little more vulnerable to stuff like this and things like osteoporosis. So that's it for chapter 16. Throughout these videos, we've walked through the pituitary and the hypothalamus. Remember, your hypothalamus is the boss of the pituitary gland, which releases a ton of different hormones that we walked through. We also talked about the thyroid and parathyroid glands and the hormones that they release. We talked about the pancreas as well as the adrenal glands.